If you're a girl, it's 12. If you're a boy, it's 13. So I'm thinking, maybe he's looking like, he's carrying real wood, so maybe he's 13. Okay, we'll say that. Now, what I want to do is move us past 13. I want to move us to a date 6 years later, 7 years later, roughly, where he's about age 20 at home. And most people believe that Jesus' father, Joseph, has passed away by this time, that he's actually the man of the house. He's actually the carpenter in the area. And by the way, just to clarify something, we say that Joseph and Jesus were carpenters. The word technically is a builder. So many people have shortened that thought to think, well, it's just carpentry stuff. But it's very likely that as a builder, since the most prominent raw material up in the northern Israel was rock, that maybe he was just as employed doing kind of rock stuff as well as wood stuff. Just saying, we open up that possibility. Okay, so here he is. Let's go to 20. Now, when he's around 20, 21, two things happen that year that are going to come to us in today's passage. And, he's much older in today's passage. So around age 20, two things happen. Number one, a baby is born. Not too unusual, but that baby is going to show up in today's passage. A baby is born about that time. And in exactly that same year as well, a woman who we know very little about, her name and her background, starts a chronic disease that will last for a long time. And it happens at exactly that same year. And these two people are going to come and they're going to kind of collide with Jesus 12 years later. So by the time we get to the passage today, we're going to have a little girl who's now 12 years old and a woman who, when Jesus was 20, 21, started a chronic flow of blood that did not stop for 12 years. And they're both going to run into Jesus on the same day, in the same place, and Jesus is going to be there. So that's what we're going to look at today. Now, I'm going to ask a lot of you when we look at this because what I want you to do is compare these two parallel timelines. These two people that something happened 12 years before, and now they're meeting Jesus on the same day, in the same place, and Jesus is going to do the same thing for both of them. What I want us to do is contrast those. There's a lot of things to contrast between these two people. So keep a mental list in your head, because I'm going to ask you, to those whom much has been given, much is demanded. Okay, at the end I'm going to ask you, what do you see as contrast between these two? Because this is where these two stories, they coalesce, they collide. It's really, really interesting. And we'll see if we can gain some insight, because God doesn't do anything accidentally. He has arranged this event to happen today, 15 years later, or 12 years later. He's arranged this to happen deliberately. This wasn't an accident. We can think and say, well, what does that mean? So I'm going to ask you, what does that mean today? I've got a couple ideas, but a lot of you are smarter than me, so we'll take a look at that when we get there. Okay, we're going to go right there to this collision of these two people who are coming to Jesus. All right, so where are we coming from? Last time we were together, we saw the pigs come down the hillside. Remember, we're on the opposite side of the lake. We're on the eastern side of the Sea of Galilee, which is largely dominated by Gentiles. So that yellow line is where they got in a boat. Probably sort of a guess exactly where on the eastern coast of the sea it is. But they went over there, found this guy who had a demon whose name was Legion, cast him out. The demons went into the pigs rushed down the shore and got drowned. That's what happened over there on the bottom right of the Sea of Galilee. Now we're going back to where we came from. We're going back up to presumably, most probably, Capernaum, or if you say it in Greek, Capharnaum. We're not going to say that, Capernaum. So here's Capernaum today. We come back to the other side where he started from. And Capernaum today is this really interesting kind of archaeological village, which includes Peter's house and the synagogue that was there. So if you go to Israel, everyone stops there. It's really pretty cool. So that's where we're going back to. So we pick up the story after that crazy stuff on the other side of the lake. We're coming back to where Jesus' home base is in the north at the top end of the Sea of Galilee. If you think of the Sea of Galilee like a clock, 12 o'clock is Bethsaida, and 11 o'clock is pretty much where Capernaum is. That's kind of what we're talking about. So we're going back up there, and we're going to see what happens. So that's why it says, when Jesus had crossed again in the boat to the other side, that means coming back to Capernaum, a great crowd gathered about him, and he was beside the sea. I always, when I read that, think, and he was beside himself. No, he was beside the sea. So he'd left, to the consternation of all the crowds that had been up there. He got in a boat, and they left town. Well, the crowds are still there waiting for him. And he comes back, and they come to him while he's getting out of the boat, while he's at the sea. So right there again, we're at the sea, and the next stuff transpires while we're there in Capernaum. Okay, Then came one of the rulers of the synagogue, Jairus by name. Not a real picture. Sort of a real picture. Jairus by name. And Jairus, seeing him, he fell at his feet and implored him earnestly, saying, "My little daughter is at the point of death. Come and lay your hands on her so that she will be made well and live." In some of the other Gospels that also cover this story, they say she was dead. And even in Mark's Gospel right here, by the time we finish the story, she's dead. So it's bad. Jairus is a high-placed person in the local synagogue right there. And again, like I say, if you go to Capernaum today, you'll see that synagogue. It's there. It's there. There's just no question about it. So he's a high-placed official right there, and he has a lot of responsibilities in the synagogue. One is just to make sure that the synagogue services go well on Shabbat, on Sabbath. Also, a lot of care and feeding he does to a lot of people in the village. I mean, he has a lot of responsibilities. And he makes sure that the law of Moses is done right with the people that are there. People who violate it, they need to kind of police it. They're really the only law and order in the area. People who are doing horrible things, make sure they're not part of the village. I mean, a lot of stuff. So Jairus is a kind of he's a cross between kind of a police station chief and a religious leader, pastor thing. I mean, they were really the order right there. So that's Jairus. So because of that, Jairus carries some weight, okay? He's a guy who speaks and people listen. And so when he comes to Jesus and makes this request, it isn't just a guy, talking on the sides. This is a guy who has some authority, who's saying, "Jesus, will you come and do this?" Now, you don't see him hefting his authority here, but you got to understand, this is a voice that will be listened to. Even in the village, they'll listen to him. So this is Jairus, important man. In Luke, we see that this little girl, Jairus had only one daughter. He only had a daughter, and she was about 12 years of age. So this is the one that was born when Jesus was about 20, 21, somewhere around there. So she's 12 years old, and she is his only daughter. So this is desperate. So you got the picture now. You have a man of reputation in the village, a man with some authority, a man who speaks, people listen, a man who comes to Jesus and says, "My daughter is dying. Maybe she's actually dead right now. You've got to come." So in this passage, he does have an urgency in his voice, because it's like, well, you remember when Mary and Martha, when Lazarus was dying, they sent a note to Jesus, said, "Come right now, he's dying. If you come fast enough, you can save him from dying." And then Jesus cools his heels, has an iced tea, sits out in the desert for a while, waits 2 days, and then goes. What? I mean, he's going to die. Jesus deliberately allows Lazarus to die. So there's this urgency that if you can get there fast enough, Jesus, they will not die. That's Jairus' urgency here too. If you can come fast enough, she will not die. Let's go to my house. Let's go right now. Let's go right now. There's a great urgency in him to get Jesus to come to his daughter before she dies, because she's on the brink of death. If we wait a second longer, she might die. And then all is lost. Of course, we read the Bible and we know that when you're dead, all is not lost. Still, Jairus isn't sure of that. So his urgency is there in his thinking. So Jesus says, okay. And he went with him. He's going to go to the house. Perfect. And so you can see Jairus leading the way to the house, because he's the one that knows where the house is. And he's leading Jesus, and he's saying, "Come on, let's go. Oh, she's over here, And there's a big crowd around him that came up from the lake. And you see this big entourage moving with great speed through Capernaum, trying to get to Jairus' house, because he wants to get there before his daughter dies. It's a big deal. So here's this urgency in the streets. Well, a great crowd followed him and thronged about him. Another picture from Tissot of this very event. A great crowd followed him and thronged about him, which probably for Jairus made him go a little crazy, because these people are stopping him, and these people are crowding around Jesus, not because they want to get to Jairus' house, it's because they want to be healed or whatever, right? So it's slowing things down. So you can see Jairus, in my mind's eye, kind of pulling the crowd down, and the crowd is pulling Jesus back, and here's this big tug of war going on where they're trying to get to Jairus' house before his daughter dies, but there's all these people that have needs as well. You see the tension? That's where we're at. Great crowd followed him, thronged about him. Well, there was a woman who had had a discharge of blood for 12 years, same as the age of the girl. Interesting. And this came on, and it became a chronic thing for her all these 12 years. Now, you have to understand, in Jewish law, this made her an outcast in the village. She clearly could not go in the synagogue. So much of the community action in Capernaum happened in the synagogue, but she couldn't go in the synagogue because she was unclean. And she remained that way, not only being excluded from the synagogue, but excluded from contact with most people, because like a leper, she had almost the same status as a leper. If she got close to people, they would become unclean because she's unclean because there's blood. So she was clearly a social outcast from the whole village right there. I mean, everyone, the contact was just remote. You could talk to someone across the way, but you had to be careful how close you got to them. The other thing too is that because of her disease, it wasn't obvious like a leper would be obvious that there's a problem. I mean, if you saw a leper and you saw the skin and you saw the fingers, you'd say, well, I got to stay away from them. They'll make me unclean. But for her, supposedly her problem was kind of invisible to most people. You couldn't tell. So the reason that she would keep distance, people would say, why are you keeping distance? Well, because I have this thing and I'm unclean. They go, oh, okay. It was one of Jairus' jobs in the village to make sure that she didn't contaminate other people with her uncleanliness. Now, that's a presumption, but that's like a 98% sure thing. Jairus was responsible to make sure that the village stayed healthy. And part of that is to make sure that this woman stayed apart from the people. So Jairus is one of those people who had to enforce that law. It seems heartless. So you got to put yourself in her shoes. She has had this problem for 12 years. 12 years. And the problem medically is horrible. Socially, it's probably even worse. She's been isolated for 12 years. And who had suffered much under many physicians, and had spent all that she had, and was no better, but rather grew worse. So for those 12 years, she used every resource she had to buy some time with some physicians who said, I can heal you. And she'd give them her money and they'd do something. I don't know what they would do. Many times it was herbal and nothing would happen. And in fact, during this time, she didn't get any better. There was no turn upward. There was always a turn down. She got worse and worse and worse. And she was bankrupt after all this time. 12 years. Let's see. This is 2023. 12 years back from here would be 2011. Thank you. Okay, there's a few people here. I know you're watching, but some people are just math challenged, so that was just too much to. You knew I'd make fun of you if you got the wrong year. So let's say we go back to 2011. Can you imagine getting a disease back in 2011 that didn't get any better but got worse? And because of that disease, everyone you knew said you got to stay away. There's no more dinner invitations. There's no more nothing. I mean, it's just zero. Just zero. Now, to be fair, many of us here, and I know, have had chronic problems that go far beyond 12 years. And it's frustrating. I mean, it's really frustrating. And you pray and you ask God to deliver you from it. It's still there the next day when you wake up. It's still there the next year when you wake up. It just seems to be there. It seems like God's really not listening. But I know many in this room have been putting up with chronic problems and still do to this very day that go far beyond 12 years. And that's tough. But you got to, starting say from 2011, it's almost unthinkable. But then add on top of that this social isolation, which from a pain perspective, emotionally, is much worse. I mean, the very person who's suffering under this chronic disease, who you just want to come up to and, put your arm around him and say, I'm praying for you. I want you to know I love you. And, blah, 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 blah. You can't even do that. You can't even get close to do that. You can't encourage, except at a distance. Hey, I'm praying for you. Don't come any closer. I'm praying for you, so I hope things work out well and God will heal whatever you're dealing with. Hey, don't come any closer, right? Can't touch him. It's a horrible situation. And on top of that, she's spent everything, and not only just money, but also all of her hope. Her hope chest, in a sense, is emptied. I mean, she's out of gas with this entire thing. Whew. Well, she had heard the reports about Jesus and came up behind him in the crowd and touched his garment. Now, why she thought this would do something, I don't know. However, it is very tactful because technically speaking, if she touched Jesus proper, not just his cloak, but touched him, he would be unclean. So she's probably thinking, well, I've spent the last 12 years not getting close to people. The last thing I want to do is contaminate Jesus. So if I can just, he's coming by, if I can just give a little bit of, maybe, and I'll do it in a way that he won't notice. Yeah, because look, he's doing something very important for a very important man whose only daughter is dying. I don't want to get in the way. He's swishing down the streets. There's so many people. I'll have cover. I can do this anonymously. Anonymously, that's the wrong word. Anonymously, I can do, that's a weird word to use. I can do this anonymously. I can touch Jesus. I can get healed. And they can just keep going on in their business to get Jairus' daughter fixed. Yeah, that's what I'll do. Enough people, he'll never see what I'm doing. So she goes up and she touches his garment. She said to herself, if I touch even his garments, I'll be made well. Whew. So when she does, immediately the flow of blood dried up, and she felt in her body that she was healed of her disease. She knew instantly, after 12 years, she knew instantly it stopped. That did it. Yeah. Now, at this point in the story, if I was writing the Bible, if I was Jesus, and I sensed that something had just happened behind my back or something like that, and I also sensed that she wanted to be anonymous. She didn't want to, maybe a big deal. And I also want to be sensitive to Jairus' urgency because his daughter's dying. As Jesus, I would write the story that he would sense it and then just keep moving. Right? Doesn't that make sense? Because why do anything to embarrass her? Let's just keep moving. She's much better. Let's go to Jairus' house. Let's not stop the flow of this parade. Let's just do that. But what happens is exactly opposite to what I would expect to happen. So Jesus, perceiving in himself that power had gone out from him, immediately turned about in the crowd and said, who touched my garments? He stopped the entire parade. He stopped this big urgent flow over to Jairus' house. This huge momentum of all these people. He stops it dead and says, okay, who touched me? And of course, it's a crazy thing. His disciples that said to him in verse 31, well, hey, you see the crowd pressing on you, and yet you say, who touched me? What are you talking about? What are you talking about? This seems like a very unnecessary stop. And I can see Jairus in my mind's eye. This is my supposition, but I can see Jairus going, forget that, Jesus. Let's go. My daughter's dying. We got some real stuff to do. What do you mean, who touched my garments? But Jesus deliberately stops the entire parade. Now, if you're the woman, you're thinking, uh-oh. She wanted to be hidden. She wanted to be anonymous. And somehow, all I did was touch his garment, and somehow he knew. Oh, no. Maybe she's not even supposed to be in the crowd, and she probably isn't supposed to be. I think she just figured what she could do is sneak in under the radar, touch and get out, and then basically no one would see she's violating the rules. How can that be bad? After all, this might be my own big chance to get healed by Jesus. I'll just do this. So she's probably thinking at this point, who touched my garments? She's thinking, Jesus caught me. He caught me trying to sneak in. Oh, no. Maybe that was totally inappropriate. Maybe I should have stopped and said, Jesus, heal me. Maybe I did it completely wrong. And now he's going to call me out. And now Jairus is going to be mad at me because I'm stopping the parade because I did this. You see what she's going through? At this moment, she's really worried. Well, she keeps her head down. She keeps her head down, and Jesus goes into what I call periscope mode. Ding, ding, ding. He's looking around. He looked around to see who had done it. Now, you got to realize the drama of this moment. Who touched my garments? The disciples say, are you crazy? Everyone's touching you. And then Jesus doesn't respond to him. He just goes silent and looks. Can you imagine if you were her in the crowd and he's just panning like this? Of course, if you see someone who's trying to hide in a crowd, they become pretty obvious. They're not making eye contact, and they're gonna. So he does this really. It's just an amazing abrupt stop. Jairus is probably going even one more notch crazy as Jesus is doing this. And Jesus, since no one's admitting to it, he's just going to scan the crowd. He's just going to scan the crowd. Until the woman, knowing what had happened to her, came in fear and trembling and fell down before him and told him the whole truth. She couldn't take it anymore. I think, in my movie of this scene, he does a couple of scans. She's averting her eyes, and then Jesus settles in one spot, and she finally kind of looks up. That's how I see it. And then right now, then she knows she's been pegged. Jesus knows. So she figures, well, the gig is up. I'll just kind of let it all out. But her emotion, it says here, Mark's very clear, is she was fearful and she trembled. And that's, have you ever been so scared that you tremble, that your knees knock? She'd been found out by Jesus. Now, it's interesting because she knows that Jesus must be who she thought he was because she got healed. Woohoo! She got healed. So this is a good thing, right? It's a good thing. But if this is the Messiah himself who has the power to heal me, he also has the power and insight to judge me. And I'm in his presence. And I think I might have just done something inappropriate. So that's the fear and the trembling. This is the mighty Messiah, the anointed one, God in the flesh. And he is looking for you and he calls you out. And you fess up. That's why her next thing is actually to fall on her knees and to repent and to confess. Because when you're in the presence of God like that, she's confessing because she knows who Jesus is. He just healed her. So she just decides, no excuses. I'll just come clean. So she just lets it all out. And I love her attitude here because she knows she's in the presence of a great power and authority, God himself in the flesh. And she decides her best play is to confess, which is also our best play, by the way. Just let it all out. Just let it all out. So she tells him the whole truth. And he said to her, hey, daughter, your faith has made you well. Your faith has made you well. And then right after that, we'll come back to that in a second, he says, go in peace and be healed of your disease. By the way, did you know this is the only person in the entire New Testament that Jesus uses the term daughter? It's a wonderful, touching kind of thing. And it makes sense because here she is trembling in front of him, trembling. And so he needs to diffuse her fear. And he says, daughter, which makes him a father. But you see the wonderful connection he does? He could have said any number of other things. He could have said woman, which we see a lot in the New Testament. He could have said anything. I mean, he could have said a lot of things. He doesn't even have to give her a name like daughter. I mean, he could just say, well, your faith has made you well. That's the end. What a wonderful thing. While she's trembling in front of him, and he communicates a title to her that communicates care and love and compassion. You're okay. And by the way, he says, it's your faith that's made you well. Now, a lot of times we look at a phrase like that and think, well, then what I need to do to heal myself is just get myself some more faith. I'll fill up the gas tank of my Christian car, and once that gas tank is full and the indicator says F, then I'll have enough faith and I can heal myself, and boom, everything's possible. I can command the mountains and they'll move. No, faith is not a gas. Faith is not a fuel that allows you to do things you can't do on your own. Faith is a confident expectation in what God is and what he'll do for you. That's what faith is. And that's all based on your knowledge and your embracing of who God is. So in this particular case, and all the cases in the New Testament, when we use the word faith, what Jesus is saying right here is, you know who I am and you are embracing and trusting who I am. Faith is almost exactly the same as being persuaded about the truth of who Jesus is. But then the next step is you trust him as a result. You understand who he is, you embrace who he is, you trust him. That's what she's done in one fell swoop here. She's done all that. So it says the fact that you have that kind of faith, the fact that you, number one, know who I am, and number two, you're willing to actually trust me and place your life in my hands, and you expect me with my power to be able to heal you, that's your confident expectation based on God's love for you, and so it's going to happen. Faith. It's not something that she's responsible for. It's something that she has done to place her trust in Jesus because she knows who he is. Big deal. And we've talked about this before. The demons have a wonderfully accurate idea of who Jesus is. But even though they know accurately who he is, they don't trust him. They don't place their lives in his hands. So there really is a two-step process, understanding who he is, and then the result of that, you place your trust in him. That's how that works. Go in peace, be healed of your disease. Now, this little thing right here, the statement, was, number one, meant to assure her she was okay in what she did. But number two, it was made very publicly stated in front of this crowd and in front of Jairus. Store that away for a second. Okay, let's move on. And while he was still speaking, there came from the ruler's house some who said, hey, your daughter's dead. Why trouble the teacher any further? What a wonderful, touching moment. Daughter, your faith is. And then they come and say, Jairus, you might as well slow down. She's dead. But in this moment, Jesus decides to change that thinking. But overhearing what they said, Jesus said to the ruler of the synagogue, don't fear. Don't fear. Only believe. Now, did you know that believe and faith are virtually the same word? One's a verb and one's a noun in the New Testament. Believe and faith, one's a verb and one's a noun. The verb is believe. Faith is the noun of where you get to. So what he says, what you need to do is just, believe what you've always believed. You came to me to heal your daughter. Stick with that. Don't think that death is a problem. That's just a temporary thing. So he assures him that we should keep going. So they get close to the house. He allows no one to follow him except Peter and James and John, the brother of James. Peter, James, and John, the same three that went to the top of the mountain with him on the Transfiguration. Remember? Woo! Insiders. They're the guys that were praying for him in the Garden of Gethsemane. Woo! Kind of the inside guys. So they came to the house of the ruler of the synagogue, Jairus, and Jesus saw commotion, people weeping and wailing loudly. By the way, during those times, if you didn't have enough friends who would weep and wail for you, you could actually hire people to weep and wail for you. And there was a minimum requirement. You had to have at least 2 people who were musically talented to be able to weep and wail. And I forget there was another number for how many people just outwardly wail. So it's very likely, because Jairus is an important man, that not only are there family members there, but he's hired a good sum of people because he's got the cash. He's got professional wailers there. So they get to the house, weeping and wailing loudly. You get paid more based on how loudly you wail. Great commotion. I mean, just chaos when they get to the house. And when he had entered, he said to them, sorry, my clicker's doing stuff. So why are you making a commotion and weeping? And I can see in the movie in my head them going, and Jesus is like, you can see them just making this eye contact going, well, why? And they would say, well, what? It's great. Why are you making a commotion and weeping? The child's not dead, but sleeping. And of course, they've been there all day. They're wailing and weeping, and they're professionals more than we are on the signs of death, by the way. Death is not that close to us. To them, it's very close. So their response, of course, isn't great respect. They laughed at him. Oh, are you joking? Are you kidding me? By the way, that's a very quick emotional turnaround for a family member who's weeping. So this is probably the professional saying this. We've been hired here to weep and wail for this little girl, and she's dead now. So what do you mean? What do you mean she's sleeping? Are you kidding? Oh, yeah. Okay. So for Jesus to do what he's going to do, he needs to get them out of the way. So he gets them out of the way, and he put them all outside. Goodbye. Okay, thank you very much. And he took the child's father and mother and those who were with him, and they went in where the child was. Taking her by the hand, he said to her, Talitha cum, or kumi. There's a dispute about whether it's cum or kumi, but it's Talitha kumi, which, by the way, is Aramaic. It's Aramaic. And if you know Aramaic is kind of like, it's very strongly Hebrew-inspired street speak during Jesus' time. So if you spoke formal Hebrew, which the rabbis did, and many people did because they would recite from the scriptures, if you spoke formal Hebrew, you could kind of understand Aramaic. Aramaic spread throughout the whole region. It's still spoken contemporaneously in Syria. Aramaic is still spoken there. And in fact, when screenwriter Mel Gibson. All I could think of was Mel Brooks. And that can put you on the wrong direction. Yeah, what I know. See, it happened, so I shouldn't even mention it. When Mel Gibson made his movie about the Christ, he actually brought people in to speak authentic Aramaic, and they came from Syria. Did you know that? They were speaking language that would be probably very close to what he heard here. So when Mark writes this, he wants to actually say what Jesus said in Aramaic, which is a touching, common street language, and it has a nice root to it, because since it is strongly Hebrew influenced, if you look at the second word, kum or kumi, it means basically to get up. But it's kind of like when an animal comes out of a stall and leaps because it's free all of a sudden. That kind of joyful, whoo, ha, ha, ha. Or maybe you have a dog that does that, or a cat. I don't know, since none of us have goats. But you know that kind of gleeful, come, jump. That's that second word. The first word comes from the Hebrew for lamb. It's talitha here in Aramaic, but tela is lamb in the Old Testament. So in a really touching kind of way, can you see this picture? He comes up, he takes her hand, and he says, "Hey, little lamb, jump." Isn't that great? Hey, little lamb, jump. So young girls are actually called little lambs. But here he's telling this little lamb, jump. The warmth of this scene just blows me away every time. Just really remarkable. Taking her by the hand, he says to her, "Talitha kumi," which means, "Little girl, I say to you, arise." Yeah, thanks for the translation. That helps us a whole lot. Wonderful, wonderful. And immediately the girl got up and began walking, for she was 12 years of age. She's not an infant, this is what it's trying to say. She's 12 years of age, and they were immediately overcome with amazement. I can't tell you how big those words are in that last sentence. They were like, whoa! Immediately, like, poof, like a bomb went off, amazed. Was she dead? Well, yeah. They were laughing at him because he claimed that she wasn't. She was dead. And so when the parents and the guys with him, the disciples, see this, they're both just thrown back on their heels and go, "Oh, wow." Big words, overcome with amazement. It could just say they were immediately amazed, but when it says they were overcome with amazement, it means like they were just, they almost couldn't stand up straight. It's just an astonishing scene. I love it too because of the contrast. Again, I'm sorry, I apologize, I have a movie in my head, but you have this close-up shot where Jesus is holding her hand and says, "Hey, little lamb, jump, let's go." Does that, and then she gets up, and everyone else in the room goes, "Whoa! Whoa!" Can you see the contrast? And I'm still making a movie in my head, and there's people outside the house where all of a sudden it's quiet for a while. Whoa! Goes on in the house, and they're going, "What?" Right? It's okay. I'm sorry. I'm afflicted with movies in my head. It's such a dramatic scene. And he strictly charged them that no one should know this, and told them to give her something to eat. Again, Jesus is trying to limit his exposure as Messiah in the Jewish part of Israel just to make sure that hostilities against him don't happen too fast. So as these things happen, he says, you need to keep a lid on this for a while. And oh, by the way, practically speaking, he needed to give her something to eat. So there you go. Always caring for her in the entire situation. By the way, to remind you, he didn't tell the demon-possessed guy on the other side of the lake to keep his lips shut. You remember that? He says, "Go all over Decapolis and tell anybody you can find about me and what happened." The reason for that is on that other side of the lake, on the eastern side of the lake, it turns out it's all Gentile. I mean, cultic, pagan Gentile. So word's going to spread quick over there, but it's not going to jump across the Jordan or jump across the Sea of Galilee over to the leaders in Jerusalem who are going to get hot under the collar because of it. It's going to take a long time for that to filter over. So he says to him, "Don't come back with me to Capernaum. You stay here and you tell everyone you know." Just tell everyone you know. And to this day, he's the only guy we know that was spreading the gospel on that side of the Jordan. And we don't know the extent of what happened over there. Okay. Let's do a little wrap-up. We're going to do a few more verses after this. But here's your thinking cap time. What do you see as wonderful contrasts between Jairus and his daughter and this woman whose name we don't know? What do you see that's the same? What do you see that's different? Why did God deliberately put these two together in one occasion? What do you see? Just make observations. Both daughters. I just love that. And I'll add on top of that, if I might, the tenderness of both events. The tenderness of both events. Daughter, faith has made you well. Talitha, kum. See the tenderness with both these daughters? Just a great thing. It's just a wonderfully warm thing. God sees you as his children, and in his compassion, he heals you. Yeah.
So I've never thought quite about this before, but both being female second-class citizens.
Female second-class citizens.
Jesus' touch was involved in both.
Touch both times. Yep.
That's significant.
Yeah.
That Jesus would allow touch with women.
And there's a contrast in the touches. The initiation for the touch happens from two different directions, from Jesus and from her. It's a nice contrast, but the same kind of thing. Jesus allows us to come close. Yeah. Oh, Pastor Karen, behind you.
You have the blood and the resurrection.
The blood and resurrection, yeah. Yeah, and there was a saying in the Old Testament that there's life in the blood. So life always was represented by blood itself and the giving of blood as the shedding of life. So clearly, even metaphorically with her, although it's a real blood problem she's got, she's losing her life slowly. She's losing her life slowly. Okay, let's go to Karen, then we'll go to these.
With the woman, she wanted to be anonymous. And
Yeah,
everything,
anonymous.
It was very public. And in calling her daughter, it implied a relationship.
Yes, daughter, relationship. Yeah.
With the girl, she was already kind of anonymous because she was a girl and
Yeah.
set aside by all the adults. But then Jesus wanted her to be anonymous in that he said, "Don't tell anyone."
Yes. Yeah. And to this day she's anonymous. We don't know her name.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But at the same time, there was still this relationship. I'm calling you
Yeah,
more than a daughter.
isn't that great? The relationship is so evident in both cases. Yeah. And for her, for the woman, she just wanted to get in and get out. And she didn't really want to have a relationship with Jesus, but clearly she understood who he was enough to trust him. And he says, "Nope, we're going to start a relationship today." Yeah, let's go over here and then we'll go over here. Right.
But you can trust Jesus. Like, you can see it from Jairus' point of view. He wants to be healed. And the way to get healed, he has his plan, he has his action, he has his time.
He's got it all figured out.
Get there,
Right.
rescue the day.
Rush, rush, rush.
Yeah, and Jesus takes a different path, different way, and it all turns out fine. But often I know in my own life, I want God to act in my timing, in my way.
Yes.
He doesn't do that.
Yes.
But he gets the end result.
Yep. I think that's partially why Jairus is in this story. He's a man who's used to being in control. I mean, that's his job there in the synagogue. And he's not in control. And everything conspires against him being in control. And so Jesus just says, "Well, believe, we're okay." Yeah. A lot of our plans, God says, "Oh, okay, but we got other stuff planned too." We got to heal this little girl, and then we got to heal this older girl. And yeah. Okay, you're going to say? Hope from hopelessness. I mean, isn't that really true? Isn't that really true? Because in a lot of the narrative up to this point, Mark just says Jesus is going places and he's teaching, but as he's going, he's healing people. Almost as though the picture in my mind is he's got this magic wand. He's going, heal, 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 heal. And you don't see any of the personal stuff. But this, you get an up close and personal hope comes out of the hopelessness. And I think, especially when you talk about the 12-year thing with the woman, can you imagine, in 12 years, you're clearly being tempted to be totally hopeless. God is not listening to me. Or you can borrow the words of the psalmist, many times David, where he says, "So God, things are bad. Are you sleeping?" 12 years. 12 years. Oh. We were going to go somewhere. Oh, there.
She knew in her heart that he has the power to heal every one of them.
Yes. Yes, she knew that Jesus could do this. That's what she believed. That's her faith. And Jesus says, "Okay, you're right. You got me right. I can do it, and I will."
The moment she touched it,
Uh-huh.
within
Yeah.
a second she was healed.
Yeah, really great stuff. She was healed then. Yeah, Karen, go ahead.
The crowd's response was both of them were skeptical.
Yes.
You can't do this. Who's touching you? You can't know that. And laughing at him. They were.
Wow, they were laughing at him. Like we know death and you don't. What are you saying, man? Yeah, I know. Let me do one more question because we've got a couple more passages to go to after this that I just want us to see before we finish. Put yourself in Jairus' shoes for a second. What transpired in front of your eyes, and why was it important for you to be there? Because God arranged this way. I mean, it could have been Jairus wasn't part of this. He sent an emissary like that centurion does. I mean, what? Jairus. And he's the only one whose name we know in this. We don't know the little girl's name. We don't know the woman who had the bleeding. But we do know Jairus' name. And by the way, as you're thinking about that, I'm stalling for time as you're thinking about it. Many times in the New Testament narratives, a name was put in there so that people in that first generation after this would recognize the name. And they'd say, "Oh, You mean that Jairus? That's the Jairus in this story? The Jairus that we've always known in our village who's done this since Jesus resurrected? That Jairus? So a lot of the names are meant to be touchstones to people in that first generation who were eyewitnesses. So Mark could write here and say, and the guy's name was Jairus. And people would go, oh, I know him. So why was Jairus there that day? Why was it important for him to be in the narrative? Think about his job. Think about his authority. Think about his love for his daughter. By the way, there's no really right answer in this. I'm just kind of stimulating nerve cells that are just barely turning on after coffee right now. So why did Jairus have to be there? Yeah, go ahead. He could recognize him. In fact, he should be able to see him as the Messiah. Yeah, he's an expert in the Old Testament. He should be able to spot him and say, that boy, that's the Messiah for sure. Yeah, absolutely. That's important. Because that didn't happen in much of the Pharisee community, especially when he goes south from here. Yeah. What do you think, Viju?
When Jairus saw Jesus in the crowd,
Yes.
immediately
He picked him out in the
believed.
crowd. He believed who he was. Jairus believed him.
Immediately he believed
Yeah, yeah.
that this guy can do the real magic,
Okay. Has the real power.
the real power.
Yeah.
I can bring him in to see where my daughter is dying for the disease.
Yeah.
I will bring him in and it will be healed within a second.
Okay. So he did really believe who he was. Okay.
Yes.
Well, I'll bring up two things. One of them that kind of comes from that I've been thinking about for decades. So this is just my ongoing guess. And maybe this will start ongoing guess with you. But number one is the fact that the next Sabbath, when Jairus is involved in it, is going to be a different Sabbath. He's probably, what you're saying, he's probably going to say, I think we just got visited by the Messiah. It's going to completely change the whole Sabbath service. Number one. Now, that's a presupposition, I'm guessing, but I don't know how he can avoid that because as a leader in the synagogue, baby, things will be different from this point on. Number two is her public isolation. Remember I said before that the leaders in the synagogues were the ones that enforced the isolation based on these unclean things. And based on the fact that this uncleanliness was hidden in large measure, how would she ever be included back into the society in Capernaum unless some leader in the synagogue said, I have bomb-proof proof that she is healed forever? Now, she could have come to Jairus later if he hadn't seen this all happen in public, because this transpired in public, and Jesus made sure deliberately it was a public thing. She wasn't going to get off being anonymous. It could have been, if she did succeed being hidden in all of this, that it would take her some time to convince the synagogue leadership and all the people who had the responsibility of keeping the unclean people away from the clean people and all that kind of stuff. You can't be in the synagogue. It might have taken her a long time to be included. But because Jesus did a public statement about her being cleansed and did it in front of one of the guys who enforces the law, then he could say, she's clean. Why? Because she claimed it? No, because Jesus said it. So instantaneously, as fast as she gained health, she gained re-entrance into the society. Because Jesus did it publicly, cost her a little bit of embarrassment, but it also cost Jairus being there to hear it. And could it be that even the sickness of Jairus' daughter was designed in a way to get Jairus publicly close to hearing Jesus proclaim her clean? Could it be that her sickness and death event was necessary in order to re-include this woman instantly in the society? I don't know. You're going to say, Doug?
Well, there's a contrast here with the woman with the bleeding problem. That was all in public and it was announced.
Anonymous, yeah.
He healed her, but then he also instructed Jairus not to say anything to anybody.
Right. Keep this under your hat. Yeah. Yeah. But I really like it because Jesus deliberately stops the parade, makes a public declaration. And I think, this is just Jim's guess, I think that's largely so that Jairus will say, today she's clean. And you know how I know that? Because Jesus said so. Like, can you imagine 12 years of isolation on top of losing your fortune to get healed by physicians who don't know what they're doing? And in a split second, she's not only healed, but she's reintroduced back into society. If you miss that second fact, that she was healed back into society, you miss the majority of the message of this. This wasn't a simple healing. This was a healing and a reintegration into the care community. And a Jairus who now is radically transformed by coming this close to the Messiah. And everything in Capernaum from that point will be about the fact that the gentle healer came into the town. And he's the Messiah. I mean, everything changes in Capernaum. Everything does. Yeah.
I suspect that even though Christ told Jairus not to talk, Jairus talked.
Jairus talked.
This is human nature. And
Yeah.
because of that, because of his position, because of Jairus' position,
Yeah. He's responsible.
more people had a reason to believe him.
Yes. Yes. That's what I'm saying.
It wasn't just some
The subsequent Sabbath services must have been unbelievable. I mean, must have been unbelievable. And I can see him even saying, let's bring in the little girl today, and let's bring in the older woman. Let's have them come in arm by arm. I'm making this up. But I mean, you know, he could actually talk about the Messiah and talk about it in real reality fact of what just happened. I think this started a revival in Capernaum. I mean, there's just no way you can avoid it. It's just not. Okay. You got a couple decades to catch up with me thinking about this. That's just my thoughts. Okay, we got a couple other passages I want to go to. I just love this story. And by the way, don't forget, this is a deliberately designed collision course between two timelines of two people on purpose to illustrate something that can't be illustrated any other way. Okay, let's move on a little bit. Jesus does expand his ministry, and interestingly enough, he's going to move away from Capernaum in terms of doing a lot of his work. He's been doing a lot of it right there, remember, at Capernaum. I think because this event that we just read caused such, for want of a better word, a revival in Capernaum. I mean, there really is no doubt about who Jesus is, and they've seen people healed and all of this kind of stuff, that Jesus expands in Galilee. So that's what comes up next when we move into chapter 6. He expands. So here's the Sea of Galilee again. The yellow pushpin is Capernaum up there. So it says he went away from there, from Capernaum, up 11 o'clock, Sea of Galilee, and he came to his hometown, and his hometown is? I always get a Bethlehem when I ask that. But no, it's Nazareth. It's Nazareth. Okay, Nazareth, which, by the way, from the top of the Dead Sea is about a 25-mile walk. On good ground, you walk at about 3 miles per hour, which means it'll take, didn't know you were going to do math this morning, did you? About 8 hours if you're walking 3 miles an hour. 3 times 8 is 24, 25 miles. But that's flat ground. So now you also have to climb up half a mile in altitude. You start from 700 feet below sea level in the Sea of Galilee, and you go up to about 1,400 feet above sea level when you get to Nazareth. Nazareth is really up on a high ground up there. So you're walking 25 miles, you're coming up half a mile in elevation. It's going to take you a very long day, and many people would split into 2 days. So they go up to Nazareth. To this very day, Nazareth is actually a well-populated place. This is a picture from space, so there's a lot of people that live up there. It's a nice area. And it looks down on a whole bunch of low-level places, like this section on the right that look kind of greenish-brown. That's a valley. That's a valley that goes next to Nazareth. It's actually an extension of the Megiddo Valley, where our Megiddo is going to happen. So there's a valley down there that's at sea level. And then as you come down this valley, we're actually looking toward the northeast, sort of. As you come down this valley, it comes down, and it's about sea level right back here, and then it continues to go down below sea level to about 800 feet below back there. But from Nazareth, you can look down. In fact, on the edge of Nazareth are cliffs, which will be important in a second. Yeah. So they move up to Nazareth. So they've really shifted the domain of the outreach. In a sense, I think, because at Capernaum, they hit their high mark. And that's just going to ring in Capernaum for a long time, which just happened. So they're in Nazareth. So on the Sabbath, he began to teach at the synagogue. And many who heard him were astonished, saying, well, where did this man get these things? And what is the wisdom given to him? And how are such mighty works done by his hands? And hey, isn't this the carpenter, the son of Mary, the brother of James and Joseph and Judas and Simon? His homies are saying this. His homies are saying this. Like, what is going on? What is going on? So here's this kid. That's why I started with a picture of him at 13, and then we moved to 20, and now we're in his early 30s. And they're saying, we know this guy, And in fact, in one of the other Gospels, when you hear them talking like this, they say, Well, we've heard about all the stuff going on in Capernaum. Why isn't he doing that up here? There's a little bit of jealousy. I think that's in Luke 4. By the way, write down Luke 4. We're going to reference that in just a second. So they see this guy who they know, and they call him not the carpenter's son, but the carpenter. So presumably Joseph is gone by now, and he's carrying on the family business. They see a carpenter, son of Mary. He's got siblings. In another place, we talk about the fact that he's got sisters as well. And they're saying, we don't get it. We've seen this kid grow up. We've seen him for 3 decades growing up in our town. And now he comes back after news of crazy stuff going on in Capernaum and all these other places. And now we watch him, and they actually testify to something remarkable, almost divine about Jesus. They say, where did this man get these things? What is the wisdom given to him? Where did he learn this? He didn't go to rabbi school like everyone else. He went to carpenter school with his dad. How are such mighty works done by his hands? How is it possible that the carpenter kid is doing this? Doesn't make any sense. You see, and this is a natural kind of conflict in their minds, because they're saying, we know this kid, and we watched him grow up, and we saw him leave home, and now he's come back, and we hear tales of him doing, just crazy kind of things. How is that possible? How is this happening? And he says, look, this is not some divine guy. This is the kid who grew up in our neighborhood. Ugh. Yeah. I get this. This is a natural problem, because for them, they saw a really good kid. Now, this is one of the things that amazes me as well, and you'll see amazement in Jesus' voice in a second. They did see Jesus. Now, have you watched other families' kids? And, they might have several kids, and several of the kids are kind of, kids. They do stupid things, But what if in the middle of those kids there's like this gem of a kid? He obeys his parents. He's conscientious. He works hard. He says kind things to people. He's hospitable. He gives things. Wouldn't you see that kid like they probably did? Wouldn't they see a contrast between him and his brothers and sisters? So that when he'd come to this point, they go, well, that makes a lot of sense. When we were watching him grow up, he was the only one in Joseph and Mary's family who was just so considerate. He seemed to be really nice. What a great kid. He loves people. He was just a standout among all the kids in the neighborhood. This makes a lot of sense. But they don't do that. You see, that's why I didn't write the Bible, because that's what I'd write. But he comes and they say, no, it doesn't make any sense. We don't know where this stuff has come from all of a sudden. I keep hitting this. He was a kid making stuff, building stuff, and now he comes back and we hear tales. We can't connect the dots. I don't know what happened between him growing up here and him coming back. I can't connect the dots. That's an honest kind of problem that they're bringing up. Even though, of all the people in the region, they're the ones that watched him grow up. I think that's just fascinating. That conflict just blows my mind. And are not his sisters here with us? So they took offense at him. Okay, wait. What's there to take offense at? He's just come back into town, and he's being followed by a lot of people, and he's being followed by tales of things he's done in other places. What's there to be offended by? Jealousy. Uppityness. Pride. They're presuming on Jesus that he was in town, he left town and came back a cult leader. He thinks of himself too highly. He thinks he's something really important. It's jealousy, it's pride, it's all that kind of stuff where they're offended by that. But it's worse than that. That's right why I mentioned Luke 4, because Luke gives us more detail what happens right here about why they're offended. And do you remember the Luke 4 passage? If you haven't read it recently, go read this later, because it's exactly the same event. So Jesus goes into the synagogue, which is a great place to actually start dialogue in villages. They have an open mic time where anyone can get up and say stuff. So he gets up and he says stuff, and he pulls out the scroll and he reads out of Isaiah 61. Read Isaiah 61, because it's clearly about the Messiah. And he says, today it's been fulfilled in your hearing. He's basically saying, and that's me. Well, that's what ticked him off, because that seems pretty uppity when you think about it. No. You're the kid that builds stuff. No. It's me, Isaiah 61. Bind up the brokenhearted. That's me. Yeah. That's what offended them, because it just seems so presumptuous. It seems so cult-like. It just seems wrong. It squares with his character as a child and as an adolescent and a young adult, but it seems to go way beyond that, and so it just deeply offends them. So you know what they do in Luke 4 after they're offended? Remember I said Nazareth is up on a high place, and they have lots of cliffs? That's where they walk him to the edge of the cliff and try to push him off. That's how offended they were. That's how offended they were. And then Jesus does kind of a Jedi mind trick. That's what I call it. That's not disrespectful. But what happens is they push him to the edge of the cliff, and he just turns around and walks through them. This is not the execution you were planning today. He just walks through them. It's not his time. But go read Luke 4, because Luke gives us much more detail about what happens here. So in that little last phrase, they took offense at him. Boy, you don't know how much they took offense at him. They were really ticked off. Really ticked off. Really ticked off. Whew. Okay, let's push on. So Jesus says to them, a prophet is not without honor, well, except in his hometown and among his relatives and in his own household. A prophet should always have honor, except places like this. Just saying. And he could do no mighty work there, except that he laid his hands on a few sick people and he healed them. And he marveled because of their unbelief. This is the only place where we see Jesus marveling about anything. Isn't that amazing? I mean, this is God in the flesh. I mean, he's omniscient, right? And yet what he marvels at is that these people who know him so well don't know him. It's just an astonishing thing. And that's why even when we're talking about this, I'm astonished at this. It's like, how is this possible? They saw a model kid. How is it they're not connected to the lines? So Jesus marveled at their unbelief. And it's interesting, too, that because of that unbelief, it turns out that he couldn't get much done there because it depends on people's faith. Because Jesus wasn't going to heal people unless they believed in who he was as the Messiah, embraced him as Messiah, and trusted him as Messiah. Then he would act like the Messiah. But if you said, no, I don't think so, then he wouldn't do it. He'd hold himself back. Yeah.
Weren't they offended because he declared Isaiah 61 fulfilled?
Yes, he declared Isaiah 61 fulfilled. Yeah, and boy, how did they get mad at that? It seems presumptuous. The kid that grew up amongst them would be the Messiah.
Right.
That doesn't... Yeah, and actually it sort of displays an expectation they had. An expectation from the Jews was when the Messiah came, since he was so divine, he would come in a divine kind of way. I mean, there's nothing that tells exactly how the Messiah is going to come, although there's a couple comments about being born of a virgin, stuff like that. But in general, the Jews at the time thought when the Messiah comes, who is God and man in the flesh, he'll come in some kind of really remarkable way. So the fact that he could come as a child in Mary and Joseph's house and grow up and be a carpenter, that was not the expected path. So they're just, it's expectations kind of crushing things. I want to point this out. Unbelief, this word right here doesn't mean they lacked faith. It means that they had a tangible animosity toward Jesus. So there's one thing when you talk about, we saw the apostles when they're in the boat the other day and they're getting swamped and stuff like that. And he says, oh, ye of little faith. That just means you don't have enough. This means you have an anti-faith. This means that you're convinced I'm not the Messiah. That's what this unbelief right here means. It's only used in a couple places. The word in Greek for faith is pistis. Apistis. A means the negative. It's negative faith. We're convinced you're not the guy. So in that particular case, Jesus is saying, I can't get anything done if you're convinced I'm not the guy. Because no matter how much I do, I'm not going to convince you. So I'm not going to do it here. Fascinating. Fascinating. He marveled because of their unbelief. Identity. Now, I talked about this before, and we're going to do a little summary right here at the end about the identity of Jesus and how do we find out who he really is. But from this point on, he expanded this confrontive experience in Nazareth, and it goes around the entire region. So he went about among the villages teaching, and when he says among the villages, presumptively that means all the high ground areas up in Nazareth rather than the low-lying grounds. Here's the coastal area, low-lying ground, the low-lying valley that goes up to the Jordan River. Present-day Haifa is right here. Sea of Galilee, Jordan River going down, the top edge of the Dead Sea is up there. So presumably what he did is in the high ground of Nazareth, he continued to go around with the apostles in that high ground and taught, because up to this point we don't see any history of him being up there. So starting his high altitude evangelism program with a wonderful response in Nazareth, where he gets almost pushed off the hill, they continue to talk about him in other places. Let's see what else is in this picture you'd recognize. Megiddo, Har Megiddo. Megiddo is right about here, in the edge of this valley. Also, prophets of Baal and Elijah, Mount Carmel, right here. Yeah. Deborah, I like this picture. I'm going to tell you everything I know about it. Deborah, remember Deborah in Judges? She convinces the Israeli general Barak to take 10,000 guys, put them on top of Mount Tabor. Mount Tabor is right here. And they go up to the top of that mountain. And the bad guys who have chariots live in a place called Harosheth Hagoyim. And they have chariots, and they blocked all the travel, all the traffic from the Mediterranean into the center part of the country. And there's one pinch point in this area that's low level, but it's pinched between two mountains. And that's where they put their chariots to control the traffic in and out. And that pinch point is right there. And to this very day, if you go on Google Maps and you type up Harosheth Hagoyim, it'll take you to a village right there. Isn't it nice the Bible is historically accurate? Yeah, okay, let's finish the passages. I'm talking too much. So he called the 12, began to send them 2 by 2, and gave them authority over the unclean spirits. And he charged them to take nothing for their journey except a staff. No bread, no bag, no money in their belts, but to wear sandals and not to put on 2 tunics. Just leave and go. Go with nothing. And expect that people will take care of you because you're bringing the word. So that's what he challenges them to do, and he sends them out. We've seen him do this before as well, in this large area. And he said to them, look, whenever you enter a house, stay there until you depart from there. And if any place will not receive you and they will not listen to you, well, when you leave, shake off the dust that's on your feet as a testimony against them. Which, by the way, Jews were instructed by the rabbis to do every time they exited a Gentile town. Say, I'm leaving your town and I'm not even going to take your dirt with me. Bye. So Jesus tells them if they're not received, you need to consider them Gentiles. This is astonishing. This is astonishing. And so this is how they went about that high country around Nazareth, we presume, by doing this very thing. And look what he asked them to say. So they went out and proclaimed that people should repent. The core of the gospel is repentance. Mark says that the first words out of John the Baptist's mouth was repent. He also says that when Jesus started his ministry, the first words out of Jesus' mouth was repent. The kingdom of God is near. We seldom approach people with the word that you need to repent. You're in a problem right now because of sin. And there's a solution to that sin, but unless you realize that you have that problem with sin, that you need to repent and confess it, then you don't need a savior, right? So repentance is that's the point, tip of the spear in these discussions. They cast out many demons, anointed with oil many who were sick, and he healed them. So what they did in this particular case is they were on a trial run to do what they were going to do for the rest of their lives. But now they're doing it under the supervision of Jesus. Great stuff. Okay, I think we're going to quit. So these are the 3 questions we're talking about as we hover over Capernaum right now. We just wanted to ask, in Mark's account, can we answer who Jesus is? Can we answer why did he come at all? And can we answer from our personal perspective, what does Jesus demand of those who want to follow him? So far, we've been doing pretty good on that top question. Even though his homies are not willing to admit who he is, his apostles, when they're in the boat and he stills the water, they say, gee, what kind of guy is this? I mean, everyone up to this point are seeing astonishing things. We're reading astonishing things, and everyone's going, I don't know who he is. I mean, wow, this is just crazy stuff. There's such a resistance to jump over that line to saying he's a Messiah. So much so that you go through almost the entire length of the Gospels until Jesus asks the apostles, who do people say that I am? And Peter comes up, you're the Christ, the Son of the living God. Well, there you go. That's what I've been waiting for. But up till now, I've seen enough to persuade me who Jesus is. It's just fascinating to me that people who have boots on the ground here are still, not too sure. Oh, yeah, well, he did still a storm, Peter. Yeah, but, it doesn't mean he's the Messiah. What do you mean that's not the Messiah? So they would debate this kind of thing. His own people in his hometown said, well, he's doing remarkable things. That doesn't mean he's the Messiah. He's the carpenter's son. And this is a fascinating reflection of how people think about Jesus in modern times right now. You can give them all the proof in the world, including rising from the dead. And their presumptions about who he is are still going to be tough to kind of get over the top of. You believe what you want to believe, honestly. And very few people are open enough to say, well, I'll look at it objectively and I'll see where we come to. Many people did here, but it is still astonishing, even as we get this far into Mark, and we're not even at the halfway point yet, that we've seen such astonishing stuff that if it was you or me, wouldn't we stand and say, hey, Messiah, for sure. But no. People still, no, not going to go there. But I think in today's story, Jairus got there. And that's important because I think it started something remarkable in Capernaum that I'd love to talk to people who lived there after that. Saying, how did that change what happened in your village from this point? Just remarkable stuff. What does he demand of those who want to follow him? We still have not got too much on that. But if the apostles are in any way kind of a prototype for where we're being called to follow him, they were called to leave everything behind, but to basically switch lives, to leave behind a previous life and to pursue a second life following Jesus without any assurances about where Jesus was going or what he was going to do or what he was going to ask of us. They gave everything up. So that might be one aspect we got to start wrestling with. Maybe when it comes to following Jesus, he doesn't just ask us to be, fans, to be on his friends list on Facebook. Maybe he's asking for something much more radical, like leaving an old life behind and starting a new life centered on Jesus, without any guarantees about what that new life is going to be, except for the fact that Jesus will be there. And that's what the apostles have done at this point. So maybe that's true for us as well. We'll see what Jesus says. That's still to come. And in the why did he come category, we have seen him do a lot of things in terms of teaching. That was really important. In terms of proving who he was as the Messiah, that was the wonders and the miracles and stuff he did. I mean, you can tell who he is by these miraculous things he does. And also by training some people to pick up the task of sending the message around after he's gone. So that could very well be a part of what he was called to do for the 3 years. So we're just asking these three objective questions to see, can you answer the question, who is Jesus? And so what does that mean? Okay, I'm done blabbering. I took too many detours today. Jesus is going to do even more remarkable stuff. And to the very end, people are going to resist who he is. Jesus said, even if someone raises from the dead, they're not going to believe. Which brings us to the point that coming to an understanding and faith in who Jesus is probably more the job of God in our lives than it is for us in our lives. I mean, we can be presented with all that is. Paul says, how will they believe if they don't hear? And we do hear. But still at that point, the belief turns into embracing faith in who Jesus is something that God himself works in our hearts. So I just want to encourage you, as you talk to people about who Jesus is, as you share the gospel to people who don't know who Jesus is, don't be frustrated by the fact that they don't go, well, why didn't someone tell me this before? And boom, instant stuff happens. Many times seeds are planted, because we talked about that. And then what happens, again, in that parable, not only of the seed planting, but the germination of the seeds. The farmer goes to sleep at night, wakes up in the morning and goes, wow, check that out. That germination happens in people's hearts, and that's God's job. He does that. But it starts with them knowing who Jesus is and choosing either to ignore it, like his hometown did, or to embrace it and confess their sins. Radically different. So that's what's going on. Okay, as I hear the bells, we quit. Father in heaven, we thank you so much for these passages. They come alive as we read these. And Lord, our hearts are so touched by the tender